Okay, hi guys. Today we're going to look at movement in plants, and we're going to be looking at some of the specialised tissues in plants that help that take place. We're going to look at a process called transpiration. So before we start, a couple of things. Number one, bonus marks go to Chloe, who spotted my mistake in the last video where we talked about respiration, and you looked at the equation for aerobic respiration, and I kept referring to it as anaerobic. So sorry about that, and well done to Chloe for spotting it. But if you've written down anaerobic in your notes, please change it. It should be aerobic because there's oxygen involved. There's a worksheet attached to this you'll find on Insight, and your starter activity is to try to work out what each of the words are that match those definitions there. So if you want to pause the video now and have a look at those, it's also on the worksheet. I'll reveal it in a couple of seconds. Okay, so those are the answers. Do have a look through. Hopefully you know all of those. If you don't know all of them now, you will do by the end of this video. So we're going to have a quick look at how plants are adapted to be able to do photosynthesis, and also to move sort of materials around the plant, but also transpiration and the rate and the factors that affect transpiration. So let's make a start. Okay, so all living things need to exchange materials, and plants need lots of things to grow healthily. So they need obviously sunlight, because that's how they create their food, by photosynthesis. They need water, mineral ions. We all need minerals and nutrients in minute amounts to control a lot of the chemistry that occurs inside all living organisms. They need oxygen, and they need carbon dioxide. Now, why do they need all these things? Well, obviously they need water and they need carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. They also need oxygen for respiration, mineral ions for those very, very small sort of chemical reactions that take place, help them build tissue and control a lot of the chemistry that takes place. So these materials need to get around the plant. They need to get to the part of the plant where they're needed. So let's have a look at how they do that. Okay, so last time out we had a look at the basic parts of the plant there, and obviously we've got the leaves, and they're the entry and exit point for the gases that are needed. So carbon dioxide enters and oxygen leaves through the stomata at the base, the stomata at the base. You've then got the stem, and the stem actually transports quite a lot of stuff. It's a very important part of the plant. It doesn't just give it stability, and that allows them to transport minerals and sugars and also water. Where's that water come from? That water comes from the roots, and the roots absorb that water, and they also absorb minerals in very minute amounts from the soil. That's a process called active transport, and we'll look at that next time. So, how do roots uptake these ingredients? Well, they have got some very good specialisations for that to take place. The outside tip of the root, the growing part of the root, is covered in things called root hair cells. Now, root hair cells are these things here. So this is the cell, and this is this long, thin, sort of hair-like structure that comes out from it. What that does is it has a huge surface area to volume ratio, which means that it can absorb a huge number of nutrients. Now, water enters via a process called osmosis, and we've looked at transportation of materials in the last module, but osmosis is the movement of water from a high concentration of water to a low concentration of water, and that's how water enters the plant in the roots. Mineral ions enter, but they're going from a low concentration to a higher concentration, and they move by a process called active transport, which we have touched on. We will come back to next lesson. So that's how stuff enters the root, and that's in the root hair cells. We did mention meristems. Meristems are the locations on a plant that have a large number of stem cells, and that's the location on the plant that is growing all the time. It's just the tips that keep growing outwards at the stems and also at the roots. Okay, so there's the soil, and those are the mineral ions and water molecules, and they're being absorbed there. So how do they then move upwards? Well, you've then got these two transportation networks that allow water to move and minerals to move and sugars to move up and down and throughout the plant. So xylem. Now xylem we've looked at the adaptations of specifically in the past. They're made from dead material and they don't have any ends to the cells, and they're basically tubes that water can travel upwards. This is one way only travel. It travels from the roots upwards. Okay, and that's the xylem. Now the way I remember these two names is xylem, X is next to W in the alphabet, so X for water. It's not a great way of remembering it, but I'm a chemist, so you'll have to bear with me. So that's how water is transported from the roots upwards to the shoots and the leaves. And that's one way only. Phloem for food, transports sugars. That's how I remember it anyway. And that transports sugars, and that's in two directions, up and down. And those are living cells, and they've got the specialised ends here. And again, we've looked at the specialisations of this that allow the movement up and down in two different directions, because sugars are made by photosynthesis primarily in the leaves, and they have to be stored, and they're often then converted into insoluble carbohydrates and stored in root structures like potatoes or carrots, these sort of great big bulbs where food is stored for later on. Okay, so the phloem and the xylem form these very long continuous systems, and they connect the roots and the stems and the leaves, and they're often arranged in these things called vascular bundles. And last lesson, when you labelled the leaf, there was a sort of circular structure in the middle with a series of little circle holes in it. The larger ones, which are the xylem, the smaller ones, which are the phloem, and they are together in a bundle called a vascular bundle. And the vascular bundles occur in the stems and also in the leaves. So you can have a go at doing this at home if you want. If you want to try this, if you've got a bit of celery and you don't like eating celery, you can find a use for it. Just get a bit of celery, chop both ends off it, and then put it in some food colouring. Put it in some water containing food colouring, and as you leave that, what you'll see is that you've got the bowl of water is an area of high water concentration, and the celery is an area of lower water concentration. And if you've got high water concentration to low water concentration, you've got movement called osmosis. And what will happen is you'll see osmosis driving the food colouring up. You can see the xylem forming, or the xylem being highlighted by the food colouring. So, what other adaptations are there? We've mentioned this in terms of leaves. Leaves are adapted to increase the rate of diffusion of gases and also to reduce the rate of water loss by evaporation. How do they do that? Well, you've got a large surface area, which is brilliant for diffusion. You've got these great big air pockets, so the gases can spread around. You've got a high concentration of carbon dioxide outside the plant, so it moves inwards. You've got a high concentration of oxygen inside the plant, so it moves outwards. But we need to control water loss as well. So the plant has a waxy cuticle which reduces water loss, and you then got these guard cells which open and close the stomata to regulate how much water enters or leaves the cell. The leaf. And this is a process called transpiration. Transpiration is a crucial part of the water cycle, which is something you'll do if you do geography, and you'll do it in science as well. But it's how water moves up plants. So what is it? If you look at the definition of it, transpiration is the loss of water from the leaves of a plant. More specifically, it's the loss of water primarily through the stoma or the stomata of a plant. And you can see in the diagram there that water is evaporating out of the xylem and it's going into the airspace as a gas, and it's then evaporating through the stoma. It's being released into the environment. So what happens there? Well, if I'm lowering the concentration of water there, then that water's got to be replaced. And so water enters through the roots, and you can see at the very bottom here, these are the root hair cells, and water is being taken in there by osmosis. There's a high concentration in the soil and a low concentration in the inside the cells, and it then moves up the xylem because osmosis is driving this process. There's a lower concentration of water at the top, and then moves at the bottom, and that process is strong enough to move water up, trees that are 20, 30 metres tall, and you end up with this movement of water from the roots up through the stem, up to the shoots, and then out through the leaves, and that's how water gets moved upwards from the roots. It's the evaporation out of the stoma, and it gets drawn up through the roots by osmosis, and you can see that process taking place there. So, how does the plant control that? Well, the plant has an ability to control that based on the stoma or the stomata. When the guard cells are full of water, when they are turgid, then they sort of get inflated into an open position. They get inflated by water into an open position, and that opens the stoma. That allows carbon dioxide in and oxygen out, so photosynthesis can take place. When there's not a lot of water, the plant's not going to be able to photosynthesize very much because there's not enough water to do so, because it's a reactant. The plants then become sort of flaccid. The guard cells become flaccid, and that causes the stoma to close up. And that slows the movement of gases in and outwards, but it prevents water loss. So the plant will not photosynthesize a lot when it's very, very low in water, and the plant then starts to become sort of wilted. So that's how the plant is able to control the amount of water that is escaping, and that controls its ability to photosynthesize as well. So what affects this process? What are the sort of environmental factors that affect the rate of transpiration? Well, they're very similar to the factors that affect drying clothes. If you think about when you want to put your washing out, you want to put it out on a low humidity, high temperature, windy day, because they're going to be the best conditions to allow lots of evaporation of water. So let's look at those processes there. Temperature obviously will have an effect on transpiration, because the higher the temperature, the more water evaporates. So that means that the rate of transpiration will increase. There'll be more evaporation at the underside of the leaf. A high wind will do the same thing, because if it's windy, that will move any evaporated water vapour away from the plant, which lowers the concentration of water vapour outside the plant, and so that's going to increase transpiration, because there's a greater concentration difference between inside and outside of that leaf. Humidity has almost the opposite effect. If it's a very humid day, that means there's a high level of water vapour in the atmosphere, and that's going to reduce transpiration because there's a lower concentration difference between inside and outside the plant. And if you think about diffusion, and you think about osmosis, all of these processes are sped up by a greater concentration difference. Light also affects it, because if it's very sunny, then the rate of photosynthesis increases. And what that will then do is more water vapour is being used, and that will then increase transpiration. So transpiration increases when light intensity increases. So, a bit of a whistle stop there, guys. There's a fill in the blank sheet for you to do, and there's also a lot of information on BBC Bitesize, and there's a quiz at the end I'd like you to have a go at. But you should hopefully now have a good understanding of what transpiration is, how it happens, and how water and nutrients and sugars move in and or up and down and around the plant. You should know what a xylem is, you should know what phloem are, and also root hair cells. Any problems at all, you know where to find me at crum@tahs.net. But otherwise, guys, have fun, and I will hopefully see you soon. Take care.